Coming up on One Detroit, what renters and landlords are concerned about while evictions are on hold. Plus, Nolan Finley with Wayne County Sheriff Benny Napoleon on policing, Stephen Henderson's discussion on systemic racism, and then getting back to business with Shatila Bakery in Dearborn. I'm Christy McDonald, and One Detroit is coming up.
Support for this program provided by W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Business Leaders for Michigan, dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Nissan Foundation, and viewers like you.
Welcome to One Detroit. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining me. A beautiful summer week. Maybe you finally got to a salon that's open and got a haircut as the state moves to the next phase of opening during COVID-19. A lot of news. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled to uphold gay and transgender rights based on a Michigan woman's case. And in the midst of historic civil rights demonstrations around the country, Juneteenth celebrations in Detroit all this week. There's a lot to get to. Coming up on One Detroit, I'll take a closer look at the freeze on evictions and how renters and landlords are both concerned about what happens next. Plus, Stephen Henderson in a roundtable discussion on systemic racism from American Black Journal. Then Nolan Finley talks to Wayne County Sheriff Benny Napoleon on policing, and then heading to Dearborn to talk reopening at Shatila Bakery. It is all coming up. But we're starting off with concern over a potential wave of evictions. Governor Whitmer extended the moratorium on evictions for renters because there are a lot of people still out of work and they can't make their payments, but landlords need to be paid to cover their mortgages. The moratorium is set to be lifted on June 30th, and nonprofit groups are trying to guide renters who need help. Nationwide, Amherst, a data and analytics firm, estimates 28 million renters, about 22% of all households, are at risk for eviction. Some states have already lifted their moratoriums on evictions, and Michigan's is expected to end in just a couple of weeks. Ted Phillips is the executive director of United Community Housing Coalition in Detroit, a group working to help families stay in their homes.
So what have you been advising people to do, or have they been able to work with their landlords? What are they telling you?
Well, what we've been trying to do is provide some financial assistance and relocation assistance and legal assistance. My staff has been talking to landlords. Many have been willing to reduce late fees, cut out court costs, do some reduction in rent. It hasn't been really across the board, but many have been willing to do that. And we've been able to assist with making some payments with what the clients have available as well to resolve it so that when the court reopens, they won't be facing an eviction. What we're also fearful, though, of is that once hearings are allowed to be filed again, that many people will have fallen behind. We are running into a number of situations where tenants had judgments against them in March, for example, and then they lost employment and they weren't able to pay all or anything for April and May.
According to the National Multifamily Housing Council survey, 88% of apartment tenants made a full or partial rent payment by mid-May, down just 2% from last year at this time. But if and when assistance stops, that could change. And according to Phillips, we could see the destabilization of neighborhoods.
When properties become vacant, they're at high risk of being vandalized and stripped, and that is a danger to the community, and it certainly inflates property values and everything else. So we're really hopeful that landlords will see the advantage to them of working out arrangements to accept, less than what full payment would be, because they're going to be hurting as well. And if their properties are damaged, then they're going to be, not be able to rent them out anyway. We as a city, we as a state aren't really ready, I don't think, to deal with massive numbers of folks being evicted all at once. And the the shelters are filled in the city of Detroit. There isn't any place for people to go. So that had to happen, and it should continue a little bit longer. But there also needs to be some greater support for landlords that are, I mean, they're small business folks too, in many instances. So there should be greater support there for them as well, to make sure that they receive something.
There is frustration from landlords. They haven't had a break on their mortgages. Wayde Kohler is the head of the Wayne County Real Estate Investors Association and a landlord of 20 plus properties in Wayne County.
Have people been coming to the table and working with you from the landlord perspective?
One of the main things I've tried to do, especially with our group, is I've reached out to all the members saying the first thing you have to do is contact all your tenants. You have to tell them what's going on. Even though I have some tenants that make well over $100,000, I also have some Section 8 tenants that are the lower income bracket. And so I reached out to all of my tenants. I sent all of them, I have a 3-page letter that basically goes through all the services that are available. It's one of those things, if you have one rental that's vacant, or one rental that the tenant isn't paying you, you have 100% been affected by this situation. Whereas if you have 10 rentals and everyone's paying, it doesn't affect you. For me, I always have 4 or 5 people that are behind a little bit. I had one that was greatly affected by this. I reached out to him and he was basically ghosting me. I said, you can't ghost me. You have to talk to me. We have to discuss this. And so we set up a payment plan. I know when this is over, he's going to be $1,000 behind, $500 behind. There's going to be a number. And so we've agreed that when this is over, he's going back to work. He'll pay his rent plus $100 on top of it. And 5, 6, 10 months from now, he'll be caught up. What people are doing, they're paying their rent, they're paying what they can. And I actually have multiple tenants that are actually making more money and paying better now than they ever have, because they have both spouses collecting more money than they did at their waitressing or part-time jobs. You're looking at an average of $5,000 to $6,000 for every time a tenant moves out if they've been there for 2 or 3 years. Landlords don't want to spend that money. They want you to stay. But at the same time, you have bad landlords that they basically, they don't do the job right. They don't fix things. They don't clean things. They don't do anything they're supposed to be doing, and they shouldn't be landlords. And most landlords are not these big multinational corporations. They don't have 1,000 doors they're taking care of. In our landlord group, the average person has 3, 5 rentals. Some of them only have 1. There's very few that have over 10 rentals. It's a very unusual. So they're basically mom and pop. This is their extra money or their retirement.
The City of Detroit will be using federal funding to help low-income renters through United Community Housing Coalition, and the federal moratorium on evictions of certain properties that receive federal assistance is set to expire near the end of July. All right, turning now to the 3rd straight week of demonstrations around the country against police brutality and systemic racism. Stephen Henderson leads a roundtable discussion on American Black Journal, talking about what the demonstrations have meant and where policies stand now.
I am going to start with the news of the day, of course, and these massive demonstrations that we're seeing and protests across the country against police brutality and systemic racism. I don't remember the last time I've seen anything on this scale about this issue. Greg Bowens, what are we seeing, and what is the opportunity that this inspires real change, that it actually leads to things being different?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a wake-up call in a way that we hadn't seen before. And part of it, I believe, has been induced or exacerbated by the lockdown during the coronavirus. For the first time, we saw a Black man getting killed by police, and there weren't the usual distractions that were out there that people had to contend with. People weren't rushing to drop their kids off to school. They weren't rushing to get to a meeting. They didn't have all of these other things that tend to divide our attention. And the shock of having to watch that video and look at the smirk on that cop's face while the life was drained out of that brother on the ground was, I think, overwhelming. There was just no way to escape it in the ways that people normally are able to escape it. And since they were on lockdown, I think that this allowed for them to be able to focus more than we'd ever seen before.
Karen, does this mean we are going to get past these issues? I mean, when I think about Eric Garner and when that happened, Trayvon Martin, these were all before Colin Kaepernick started kneeling in his uniform before football games, and nothing changed when those people were killed. Nothing changed when Colin Kaepernick started kneeling. What's different this time?
Well, I pinned a piece of news saying how this appeared different, it felt different, but I don't want to dismiss the contributions or the support of anybody participating or wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt or with a sign, but we've got to move past symbolic gestures and start looking at the contributing factors to systemic racism. You can't wear a Black Lives Matter t-shirt afraid of speaking to a Black person that you encounter them on the street. So to me, this is a good first start, but just because they're marching with you doesn't mean they're marching for you, because we've got to allow the peeling back of a very aged scab that will reveal some very painful things about the very people that are marching. There was an interview for one of the protesters on one of the local stations, and she was being asked, what this meant to her. She couldn't tell you what it meant. So Greg talked about not having the distraction of other things because of the quarantine and the lockdown. A lot of people are participating because they want to make a change. But you have a section of people that are just out because they're in lockdown. They want to feel a part of something. But until we really have candid discussions, until we look in the mirror, and until white people look in the mirror and look at their colleagues and say, this is what you cannot do, this is who you are, and this is your contribution to a generational problem, then no, nothing will change. I saw the PBS special on the Black Panthers the other night, and the same thing happened then. You had all these white college students that were out protesting. So we've got to get past just the movement and start building momentum toward legitimate change.
Yeah. Brandon, what do you think we're seeing, and are we going to see change?
It's interesting. I think the challenge, and I got to agree with Karen, is that we've got to make sure that in this movement, this is not just a fad. And I think, unfortunately, it's become the cool thing to do, to protest, when I think Black America has some very systematic issues that, quite frankly, I don't know if a protest will change. And so, I just read Netflix is now, as a way to counter, is giving $150 million towards Black education. So now the challenge is, okay, well, that's a good thing that corporations are starting to look at the riots and the protests and to do something about it. But now the question is, well, how is that money going to be allocated? What specific programs are going to be utilized? So what are the minutiae of how do we use that financial investment to enhance our communities? And that's still a big question. But then the other thing, when we look at the protests and riots, I think it's a systematic issue of something much deeper in our society, really looking at the failed policies that have come out of our inner cities, really looking at poverty. I think COVID, people can try to get away from it or not. COVID has unleashed so many issues from our public health system, all the way down to policing issues, all the way down to the haves and the have-nots, where now things are starting to come to the format of what are the real ills of society. The protest is just a symptom.
Carrie, you consider yourself a conservative. We've seen a lot of conservatives have odd reactions to this, especially the one in the White House, although a lot of conservatives would say he's not a conservative. But I'm curious, from your standpoint, is there something you're seeing now that's surprising? Is there something now that seems different than what we've seen before?
There's definitely something that I see now that is surprising. There's no way a month ago you could have told me that the protests would reach around the world and that you would have hundreds of thousands of people coming out. And I got to tell y'all, I don't think that they're coming out simply because they were all on lockdown because of COVID-19. They've all seen, the generation that's younger than us, they've seen something that they're tired of. We have asked for years for the good white people to be our allies and to try and somehow overcome the problems that we've had to fight all of these years. I think we've got a lot of white allies who are on our side, who are also They're not just here in Detroit or in Minneapolis and Seattle, but they're all over the world, and they are sick and tired of what they're seeing. To answer the question you asked earlier, is there going to be change? There's definitely going to be change.
The protests against police brutality have led to calls to defund police. Nolan Finley spoke with Wayne County Sheriff Benny Napoleon on what that could mean for policing.
Benny, we've of course seen over the last couple of weeks the demonstrations against police brutality, outpourings in communities big and small. Is there a problem with the police, Benny?
Well, what is happening now is that the imperfections of police departments are becoming much more visible. The things that officers do wrong is now being captured very much in real time sometimes. So anything that happens that is not really up to the standards of the community is now right there in front of us so quickly that people are getting a chance to react to the imperfections. But we've had issues in law enforcement, as you may be aware of. And one of the things that I teach is that the legacy of law enforcement, unfortunately, throughout this country is one of corruption and abuse. The corruption is coming to light more so now than in the past, but it's not as prevalent as people think it is or the way it looks. But you take a police department the size of Detroit's when I was there, it was about 4,600 people. If 10% of those officers were corrupt, it would look like the entire department was going crazy. That would be about 450 cops. That just was not the case. I had about 1 or 2% who were giving me the majority of my problems at that time. But overwhelmingly, the officers are doing an exceptional job. It's just that when it's law enforcement, because of the critical nature of what we do, the results are amplified.
How do you find those bad cops and get rid of them, deal with them before problems occur?
Recruiting, hiring, training, retention. We need to work on what people we are forced to retain. Oftentimes, folks that we have tried to fire, we are not able to get rid of them because of the strong union contracts that exist. I've had, even in disciplinary issues, I remember finding a guy who killed a kid, a 12-year-old, and he was given his job back in arbitration. And there was nothing I could do about that.
You have now more African-American police officers, more African-Americans in charge of police department. You have things gotten better over that period or not?
Oh, absolutely. It's gotten better in those agencies that reflect the community. One of the reasons I believe that Detroit had the protests, but we did not have the violence and disruption in our community is because for about 47 years, we've been working on creating a relationship with the community, and people have relatives, mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, uncles and aunts, nieces and nephews, friends, church members, people they've gone to school with that are in the community that they know, and they recognize that all police officers aren't bad, but they know that there's some that are. But majority of the ones they know are people who love the community, love what they do. So Detroit has had a completely different experience during these turbulent times. It's also the fact that, you know, I think many of us still remember 67. We've never recovered from the riots of 67. And I don't think Detroiters have an appetite to tear their community up once again, because we know how long it takes to recover from that.
Sheriff, is there something fundamentally wrong with the way we police?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we have to have standards for recruiting, hiring, training, and retention that should be national. One of the things that I'm very strong on is residency. I believe that a community should be able to require police officers who are policing their community to live in that community. And I think that if you live in a community, you're going to be much more sensitive to the people who live there, because they're your neighbors. They go to school with your children. They play with your children. You may attend the same schools or churches or shop in the same places. And I think that that's one of the things that we really need to look at. There are just some things that should be consistent throughout all police departments at a bare minimum.
And finally, more restaurants and businesses are opening up, and there's a lot to take into consideration for those small business owners to prepare. We checked in with Shatila Bakery in Dearborn. Will Glover has more.
So tell us just a little bit about the bakery in case anyone's unfamiliar with, what type of bakery it is and, the work and things that you guys do.
So Shatila Bakery is one of the first Mediterranean bakeries in the U.S. We make Mediterranean pastries such as baklava, which is our top seller, homemade baklava. And we were established in 1979 by my dad, Riyad Shatila. And we grew from a very small location to a national and international brand name.
As we enter this pandemic, because you guys already do, shipping around the world, what's the status of the bakery right now?
So it was really difficult for us at first, especially at the bakery. We're doing a lot of carry out and a lot of delivery. So we're trying to monitor and deal with things as best as we can, but it is still difficult because we're still understaffed. And I'm happy to say that business is picking up, because I think people are just adjusting to the reality of things now, but we still have to operate really carefully and with, a little bit of fear.
Did you guys also apply for some of the business relief that was offered by the state, federal, and local governments?
Yeah, luckily we did do well with our, applications. We got the payroll protection program. So I say that was helpful. The difficult part about that is that it's hard to get a loan, and I know a lot of businesses are facing this now because there's some businesses that got loans and they have, a certain amount of time to repay it, but they're not even open yet. So we thankfully we're open, but we're still operating with less employees than we want. So that's a little bit difficult when it comes, to paying back the loan and the loan period and things like that. I know a lot of businesses are hoping that the government would be able to extend some of these loans and make it a little bit easier on us, because even though they've been generous with giving out money, it's difficult when you still have a deadline in mind and, some pressure to operate more than you realistically can at this point.
Right. So speaking of other businesses, have you been in contact with any other owners in the area or, heard about some of the challenges that they're facing?
I know personally in Dearborn, there's a lot of small, there's a lot of grocery stores and meat markets that have reopened. And I think it is difficult for them because some of the problems that we've been facing is having big families trying to come in at the same time. And luckily we've limited these people from coming in. Like we'll say okay, maybe one person from this family can come in at a time. But if you see different stores where people can't really, they can't really push the family away or discourage them from limiting the people coming into the store, it does tend to get a little bit crowded, and it's difficult to enforce that way. And even with the masks, we've been enforcing people, or suggesting in as friendly of a manner as we can to come in wearing a mask. Some of them are a little bit disconnected from the news, or they don't want to take everything that they're hearing from the media seriously. So they'll say, well, I don't have to wear a mask. Everyone around me is wearing a mask. I don't have to do that. Or they'll say, I don't want to separate from my family. I want to come in and bring my family of 5 with me. So I think a big issue is going to be overcrowding and how to handle that in the most efficient way possible. And you'll see, these other stores, they'll have markers on the floor and they'll have, as many measures as they can to try and make a single file line and separate people. But the biggest issue is the customer not wanting to listen to that and thinking that they don't have to listen to that.
So that said, what does the future for Shatila Bakery look like? What is the new normal projected to be for you guys?
I think the best way to look at things right now is in the most positive aspect as you can, taking the new normal into account and thinking, okay, this is how it's going to be now, and we can run with this, but let's run with it in the best way possible for our customers and for ourselves. Let's be as efficient as possible working with this new normal.
And that's going to do it for us. Go check us out at onedetroitpbs.org for all of our daily interviews and the stories that we're working on. But we're going to leave you with a moment of zen. Here's a view of the Detroit River from Belle Isle on a beautiful summer day. Enjoy, and I'll see you next time.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.
Support for this program provided by W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Business Leaders for Michigan, dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Nissan Foundation, and viewers like you.